The flickering gas lights of the city cast long shadows on the cobblestone streets. Amidst this urban symphony, Raphael moved like a phantom. His latest acquisition wouldn't whisper history, it would scream it. Tucked away on a forgotten lane stood Raphael's pride and joy, his antique shop. Each piece, carefully curated and lovingly displayed, hummed with silent tales. The arrival of a seemingly innocuous box would shatter the tranquil rhythm of Raphael's world. A stranger stepped into Raphael's domain, a figure as unremarkable as the battered wooden box he carried.
An unmarked consignment. The stranger melted back into the rain-swept street, leaving Raphael alone with the enigmatic box.
Intrigued, Raphael carried the box to his workbench and pried open the lid. A symphony of trinkets emerged, each catching the fading light in a different way. As he delved deeper, a disquieting thought crept into his mind. Were these stories yearning to be heard, or were they demanding to be unleashed? As dusk settled, Raphael found himself reluctant to leave the shop. The antique shop, usually his sanctuary, now felt different, imbued with an unsettling aura. These trinkets were not to be trifled with. They were imbued with something ancient and potentially dangerous. Days melted into weeks, and the box of trinkets began to exert a strange pull. Customers, too, seemed inexplicably drawn to the trinkets. Raphael dismissed the strange energy as mere coincidence, blind to the darker currents that swirled beneath the surface. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a frantic phone call. The young woman claimed the locket was strangling her, speaking of nightmares and icy fingers. Raphael's unease deepened when the elderly gentleman returned the pocket watch, haunted by its incessant ticking. The antique shop began to feel oppressive, the air thick with unseen tension. Raphael immersed himself in research, learning of objects imbued with remnants of their former owners. The whispers he'd heard were the voices of spirits, their anger and despair growing stronger. The weight of realization crashed upon Raphael like a tidal wave. The trinkets, once objects of fascination, now filled him with chilling dread. He had unwittingly given the elderly gentleman not a second chance, but a tormenting echo of what could have been. The shop was no longer his own. It was a spectral crossroads. Each object hummed with a life of its own, a symphony of despair and fury. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped him as he realized he was a prisoner in his own domain. Panic threatened to consume him, but a steely resolve took hold. He had to understand the stories behind the trinkets, to appease the spirits. He was a reluctant exorcist, tasked with confronting the darkness he had unleashed. Armed with newfound knowledge, Raphael knew he couldn't ignore the chilling reality. Each trinket represented a life unfinished, a story yearning for resolution. The weight of this realization was heavier than any antique he'd ever held. The antique shop, once his haven, now felt like a labyrinth of sorrow, each trinket radiating the anguish of its former owner. Raphael knew he couldn't bear to remain within its haunted walls a moment longer. He had to return the objects to their points of origin, to confront the echoes of the past, and seek a way to appease the restless spirits. His journey began with the locket. Following a faded address scrawled in a centuries-old diary, he found himself standing before a crumbling mansion, overlooking the storm-tossed sea. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, the mournful cry of gulls echoing the sorrow that clung to the very stones. As he stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight, he was greeted by a spectral chill and the faint scent of lavender, the young woman's favorite. He could feel her presence, a weightless whisper brushing against his skin, her sorrow palpable in the stillness. In the attic, amidst dusty trunks and faded portraits, he found her diary. As he carefully turned the brittle pages, her words, filled with longing and despair, painted a vivid picture of a love tragically cut short. He learned of her final moments, clutching the locket as she breathed her last, her final wish to be reunited with her lost love echoing through the years. Section 3. The Price of Freedom. Raphael realized he couldn't simply return the locket. It was more than just an object. It was a conduit for her grief. He had to sever the tie that bound her to the mortal realm. He returned to the locket, holding it gently in his palm. Closing his eyes, he focused on the energy within. He envisioned the vastness of the sea, where her lover had been lost, and then he whispered ancient words of release. The locket grew warm, vibrating with intensity. A cold wind swept through the attic, swirling around him. He heard her voice, a cry of anguish and release, and then silence. The locket felt lighter, the mournful energy replaced by warmth. Raphael opened his eyes to find the attic bathed in soft light. He knew the young woman was finally at peace, reunited with her lost love. Section 1. The clock ticks on. Exhaustion tugged at Raphael, a physical manifestation of the emotional toll his journey had taken, yet a flicker of hope, kindled by the young woman's release, fueled his determination. He had one more trinket to confront, one more spirit to appease. The elderly gentleman bowed to the relentlessly ticking pocket watch. The antique shop, once a place of dread, now felt different. The oppressive weight of the spirits had lifted, replaced by a lingering sadness, a quiet echo of their passing. The air, no longer thick with unseen energy, held a sense of anticipation, as if the very walls were holding their breath. He held the pocket watch in his palm, its intricate engravings, now stark against the lines, etched on his own hand. Time, he realized, was a relentless thief, stealing moments and leaving behind a residue of regret. He thought of the elderly gentleman, his life a tapestry of what-ifs and missed opportunities, his spirit forever tethered to the object that symbolized his unfulfilled potential. The inscription on the watch's inner casing, once overlooked, now seemed to burn into his very soul. Tempus fugit, time flies. He understood now. It wasn't enough to simply return the watch. He had to help the elderly gentleman confront his regrets, to find peace in the face of time's relentless march. Following the faint trail of the elderly gentleman's past, gleaned from faded newspaper clippings and whispered rumors, Raphael found himself standing before a grand opera house. The building, once a beacon of art and culture, now stood as a decaying monument to a bygone era. He could almost hear the echo of music, the ghostly applause of a phantom audience. The air thrummed with a melancholic energy, a symphony of unfulfilled dreams and forgotten aspirations. He knew with a certainty that defied logic that this was where he would find the key to releasing the elderly gentleman from his spectral prison. As he stepped inside, the musty air thick with the scent of dust and decay, he could feel the weight of the past pressing in on him. The plush velvet seats, now ripped and faded, were empty but not unoccupied. He could sense the presence of the elderly gentleman, his sorrow palpable in the stillness. He made his way to the stage, the floorboards groaning under his weight. A single spotlight, its bulb long since burned out, hung precariously overhead, casting an eerie pool of darkness in the center of the stage. And there, amidst the shadows, he saw him. The elderly gentleman shimmered in the darkness, a spectral silhouette clutching a worn conductor's baton. His eyes, filled with a mixture of longing and despair, met Raphael's. In that moment, their worlds, one tangible, one ethereal, intertwined. Raphael held up the pocket watch, its gold casing gleaming faintly in the darkness.
I believe this belongs to you.
His voice echoed in the stillness of the vast theater. The elderly gentleman nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the watch.
It's time to let go, time to forgive yourself for the past.
The elderly gentleman's form wavered, his spectral hand reaching out to touch the watch.
But the regrets, the missed opportunities.
They no longer have power over you. You are free to let them go, to find peace.
As Raphael spoke, the air around them shimmered, the temperature dropping as a spectral wind swirled across the stage. The elderly gentleman closed his eyes, a single tear, luminous and spectral, trailing down his cheek. And then, with a sigh that seemed to echo the final curtain falling on a life well lived, he released his grip on the past. Silence descended upon the opera house, heavier than the dust that cloaked the velvet seats. The ghostly spotlight flickered, its faint glow illuminating the spot where the elderly gentleman had stood moments before. But he was gone, his spirit finally released from the prison of the pocket watch and his own regrets. Raphael stood alone on the stage, the silence both deafening and comforting. He looked down at the pocket watch in his hand. The frantic energy that had once pulsed within it was gone, replaced by a quiet hum, like the gentle rhythm of a beating heart. As he slipped the watch into his coat pocket, he thought of the young woman reunited with her lover, their love transcending the boundaries of life and death. Raphael returned to his antique shop, the city streets alive with the clatter of carriages and the murmur of late-night conversations. He moved through the familiar streets with a newfound clarity, a sense of purpose beyond the acquisition and sale of forgotten objects. The shop, bathed in the soft glow of the gaslights, welcomed him back like an old friend. He ran his fingers along the spines of the ancient books, their pages filled with whispered tales and cautionary warnings. He would continue to collect, to curate, to weave tales of bygone eras, but he would do so with a newfound respect for the stories these objects held, for the spirits they sometimes carried. He would no longer be just a shopkeeper, but a guardian, a keeper of secrets. The antique shop, once a place of both wonder and terror, was now a sanctuary once more, and Raphael, the once naive shopkeeper, would forever carry their stories in his heart.